Having talked about the secret government, we've begun to get a glimpse into the scenes behind society at large. But things take a strange turn the deeper we go, as many of the mysteries surrounding the secret government suggest hidden powers beyond our wildest dreams. Then the battle for human consciousness may go well beyond just humanity, but truly be a grab at the ultimate powers of the universe itself. Over the last several years, the directed energy weapons conspiracy has taken root across the internet. As major fires erupted the last several years, from California to Australia, speculation that these were not natural fires quickly took the internet by storm, as hundreds of thousands of people sharing videos showed what appeared to be a laser beam striking the area of the fire, often just before the inferno began. These directed energy weapons, shortened now to DEWs, are believed to be powerful superweapons using satellite technology or stealth aircrafts, and part of a difficult to detect weaponization of the skies and heavens. Looking back to nearly 100 years ago, it's well known that Nikola Tesla himself was working on a death ray, although he provided a different, more neutral title, particle beam, developed under the codename Teleforce. This device supposedly accelerated pellets or slugs of material to a high velocity inside a vacuum chamber using electrostatic repulsion, and then fired them out of aimed nozzles at intended targets. When talking about his device in 1934, he explained that many thousands of horsepower can thus be transmitted by a stream thinner than a hair, so that nothing can resist, going on to say that in theory, it could bring down a fleet of 10,000 enemy airplanes at a distance of 200 miles from a defending nation's border, and will cause armies to drop dead in their tracks, culminating in the tagline that it would be a weapon to end all wars. We know that after Tesla died, John Trump found when he was brought in by the Office of Alien Custody a part of Tesla's death ray, a 45-year-old multi-decade resistance box, which is an instrument that can replicate different electrical values in a circuit. Is it possible that Tesla's particle beam laid the groundwork for the so-called DEWs being used today? And if so, what reason would there be for using it to start the California and possibly Australia fires? The first time DEWs were brought to the public attention was in 2017, when Napa, California suffered the biggest wildfire in its history, and countless YouTube investigations took place into videos and photos of fires skipping houses and trees, seemingly burning straight lines through the community. The next year, two separate California fires began on November 8th of 2018, the Camp Fire and the Woolsey Fire, and once again, people began to notice some pictures and video captured that seemed to show evidence of energy beams from the heavens assaulting the Golden State. Things become even weirder when we take into account the video of a burning tree from the inside, begging the question, how would this even happen? Some might suggest that it was hit by lightning, but rather unlikely in the midst of a wildfire, especially seeing that around the tree, there doesn't look like there's much fire nearby. There's also definitely no rain. The wildfires were indeed very strange. Consider the images of cars melting on the road near intact wildlife, houses burned to ash besides their unharmed neighbors, and other oddities. While of course, some people might have set their houses on fire amidst the chaos to cash in on their insurance, there's enough evidence here to suggest there's more at play than just that. But the most incriminating evidence for the use of DEWs is this satellite data collected on the scene. This video was released only on September 8th, 2020, showing that DEWs are a significant likelihood for explaining the origins of these devastating wildfires. So, if it's true that wildfires are being started with DEWs, then who is behind it? Why are they doing it? Is it the Chinese or the Russians trying to covertly attack the US? Is it the government themselves trying to clear land or cause panic and poverty to breed dependence in its population? Many theorists suggest that the fires both in California and Australia happened to be along the paths that long proposed high-speed rail networks would be built, and that the military testing may very well be performed in a location that would clear space of cheap land for the government to use at the same time. Interestingly, an update from the US Department of Defense themselves as recently as September 16th seemingly confirmed the presence of, or at least research into DEWs, saying that new technologies are fundamentally changing the character of war, and the two Air Force services are leading that charge. China and Russia seek to erode our long-standing dominance in air power through long-range fires, anti-access/aerial denial systems, and other asymmetric capabilities designed to counter our strengths. They went on to say that both China and Russia have placed weapons on satellites and are known to be developing directed energy weapons to exploit US systems. While the US government hasn't confirmed or denied if they have their own, if Russia and China has them, then it would only make sense that the US wouldn't be far behind, or even secretly be ahead. As we learned from Wernher von Braun, whoever controls and militarizes space ultimately controls the world. Perhaps space is already militarized, far more than any of us realize. DEWs are only half the story, however, for just as it's believed the powers that be have immense firepower in the form of super lasers, it's also suggested that they have even discovered how to manipulate and control other aspects of nature, being able to create rain and snow and storm anywhere and anytime, or even create earthquakes, which brings us to the next aspect of this theory, centered around the weather research program, HAARP. Since the mid-2000s, the HAARP program has become pretty infamous for its connections with everything from chemtrails to hurricanes, and even as recently as 2010, the Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez claimed that HAARP, or a program like it, triggered the Haiti earthquake. To be fair, he didn't cite a source, and the official story is that it was caused by the slippage of a previously unmapped fault along the border of the Caribbean and North American tectonic plates. At any rate, HAARP stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, and was essentially put forward as a weather research initiative. It was designed to analyze the ionosphere, a portion of the upper atmosphere that stretches from about 53 miles above the surface of the Earth to 370 miles up. The program had been funded by the Air Force, the Navy, the University of Alaska, and DARPA. In May of 2014, the Air Force announced that the HAARP program would be shut down later that year. But while experiments ended in the summer of 2014, the complete shutdown and dismantling of the facility was postponed until at least May of 2015. Nowadays, however, the facility and equipment are controlled by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, who hire it out to independent researchers. The official research was mostly weather-based, as you might have guessed, but the US military was also interested in the ionosphere because it plays a role in transmitting radio signals. HAARP sends radio beams into the ionosphere to study the responses from it, one of the few ways to accurately measure this inaccessible part of the atmosphere. The end goal of the program, however, was to understand the physics of the ionosphere, which is constantly responding to influences from the sun. Solar flares can send solar particles racing toward Earth, occasionally disrupting communications and the electrical grid. If scientists could better understand what happens in the ionosphere, they might be able to mitigate some of these problems. Naturally, any notion of scientists messing with frequency signals and solar flares is a hotbed for alternative theories regarding weather manipulation, though. Mitchell Chosudovsky has argued that recent evidence suggests that HAARP is fully operational and has the capability of triggering floods, hurricanes, droughts, and earthquakes. While a lot of the theories surrounding HAARP are just conjecture, some sources have argued that during the Obama administration, it was used to cause Hurricane Sandy, and throughout its years of operation, it has arguably been responsible for thunderstorms in Iran, Pakistan, Haiti, Turkey, Greece, and the Philippines, and even causing major power outages the downing of TWA Flight 800, Gulf War Syndrome, and chronic fatigue syndrome. And on a more benevolent note, it was also responsible for the creation of the first artificially produced aurora in 2005. Interestingly, the program cost more than $290 million to build, with much of the budget being earmarked by the late Senator Ted Stevens, who had great influence over the US defense budget during his time in Congress. When looking into the whole thing though, two names that almost always come up are that of Nick Begich and his son Mark. Nick was an Alaskan politician who disappeared mysteriously in a plane crash in 1972, and over the years, his son became obsessed with uncovering mysteries. In his self-published book on HAARP, Mark claimed that a Russia military journal warned that blasting the ionosphere would trigger a cascade of electrons that could flip Earth's magnetic poles. While it may sound like a good science fiction novel, it's no secret that the Alaska State Legislature and the European Parliament held hearings about HAARP and did in fact get into disputes over concerns about what effects it could have on the environment. Further, the military's response only worried theorists more. When program managers swore that the facility would never be used for military functions, Mark went on to find military reports touting satellite binding research plans, along with then Secretary of Defense William Cohen's suggestion that electromagnetic waves could alter the climate and control earthquakes and volcanoes remotely. Numerous theories have also suggested that HAARP is responsible for a mysterious hum heard all around the world, along with the targeted individuals phenomenon using frequency targeting for certain individuals. Naturally, since the facility has officially been shut down, allegations argue that such actions and cases of advanced technology are the work of the deep state, which brings us to the next part of this theory. The Philadelphia experiment is probably one of the most famous advanced technology theories out there today, and it goes something like this. It was the summer of 1943, 2 years into the United States' involvement in World War II. A bloody sea battle was raging between American destroyers and the famed U-boat submarines of the Nazis. In the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, a newly commissioned destroyer called the USS Eldridge was being equipped with several large generators as part of a top-secret mission to win the Battle of the Atlantic once and for all. Supposedly, however, these new generators weren't just for extra engine speed. Following the theoretical aspects of Project Rainbow, they were designed to power a new kind of magnetic field that would make the warship invisible to enemy radar. According to the theory, with the full crew on board, once the generators were switched on, witnesses described an eerie green glow surrounding the hull of the ship. Then, almost instantaneously, the Eldridge disappeared, not even visible to radar, entirely gone, vanished into thin air. According to supposed classified military reports, when the ship returned, members of the crew suffered terrible burns and disorientation, along with a few crew members being found partially embedded in the steel hull of the ship, still alive, but with legs or arms sealed to the deck. The experiment was allegedly based on an aspect of some unified field theory, which merged theories of electromagnetism and gravity into one complete theory. The generators were said to be able to bend light around an object via refraction, so that the object became completely invisible. However, other theories are far more interesting, suggesting that the Eldridge actually moved into a higher dimension, which is how, upon returning, people were found merged to the ship. Despite the effects on the crew, however, some theorists put forth that the experiment was repeated on October 28, 1943. This time, the Eldridge not only became invisible, but it disappeared from the area in a flash of blue light and reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia, over 200 miles away. It's said that the Eldridge sat for some time in view of men aboard the SS Andrew Furuseth, whereupon the ship vanished again and reappeared in Philadelphia at the site it had originally occupied. And what's more, it had somehow traveled 10 minutes back in time. To understand if there is any truth to this conspiracy event, however, we need to look at the people who first brought it to light. In general, almost everything we know about the Philadelphia experiment comes from two main people. In 1955, UFOologist, astronomer, and researcher Morris Jessup had just published his book on the case for UFOs in the government when he got two letters from a man named Carlos Miguel Allende, who claimed to have witnessed the events of the experiment, claiming that not only had the ship been rendered invisible, but that they had actually shifted dimensions. Jessup thought Allende was a wacko since he claimed to have been taught by Albert Einstein himself. In the letters, Allende explained how the US military used Einstein's revelations to conduct the experiment, but after that, no other witnesses from the crew of the Eldridge or nearby ships came forward for 13 years or so. After trying to figure out if Allende's claims had any truth to them, Jessup was frustrated and ready to drop the investigation entirely when he was contacted by two officers from the Navy Office of Naval Research, or the ONR, in 1957, saying that they had received a copy of Jessup's book annotated by handwritten notes claiming advanced knowledge of physics that linked extraterrestrial technology to breakthroughs in unified field theory. Jessup took a look and immediately recognized Allende's handwriting, after which the ONR actually published over 127 copies with the annotations included. Eventually, this idea became so popular in fringe theories that it was turned into a feature film in 1984. For years, Allende had claimed to be the sole witness of the experiment, claiming to have been stationed on the SS Furisef. After the release of the film, however, a man named Al Bielek came forward claiming to have personally taken part in the experiment and said that he had been brainwashed to forget. It was only after seeing the movie in 1984 did his repressed memories come flooding back. But our story doesn't end there, for the events of the Montauk Air Force Base supposedly continued where the Philadelphia experiment left off. Following the theories put forward by Preston Nichols and Peter Moon, sometime in the late 1950s, secret researchers from the original Philadelphia project began to conduct research into manipulating the electromagnetic fields for military use, simultaneously looking into its effects on human psychology and behavior, and perhaps even going deeper into understanding the mysterious dimensional shift that supposedly took place. A report was supposedly prepared and presented to the United States Congress, which was strongly rejected for being way too dangerous and inhumane. So instead, the researchers made direct contact with the Department of Defense, promising a powerful new weapon that could drive an enemy insane, inducing symptoms of schizophrenia at the touch of a button. Without mainstream approval, the project would have to be top secret and black funded. According to the theory, the Department of Defense approved, and Project Phoenix was born. Supposedly, equipment was moved to Camp Hero at the Montauk base in the mid to late 1960s and installed in an underground bunker beneath the base so that they could take advantage of the satellite dish without drawing public attention. According to conspiracy theorists, to mask the nature of the project, the site was closed in 1969 and donated as a wildlife refuge park. Yet, even the government maintains that Camp Hero remained in operation well into the 1980s. This is where the theory starts to get pretty dark, as numerous people have pointed out atrocities that were supposedly committed. Supposedly, homeless people were abducted and subjected to huge amounts of electromagnetic radiation, with few surviving. People allegedly had their psychic abilities enhanced to the point where they could materialize objects out of thin air, but at the cost of their emotional and mental stability. Mind control experiments were conducted, runaway boys were supposedly abducted and brought out to the base where they underwent excruciating periods of both physical and mental torture in order to break their minds, after which their minds were reprogrammed. And of course, research into time travel and dimensional doorways were happening constantly. Could this also be the roots of the legendary Montauk Monster, a strange creature that washed up on shore near Montauk in 2008? Some believe that this may have even been a higher dimensional creature which was brought into our reality during the experiments. After the experiments were completed, depending on which theory you read, the facility was closed for good or destroyed, and all the staff were brainwashed, shot, or sworn to absolute secrecy, with all records also destroyed. According to some theories, though, research continues at the site to this day with enhanced security. One of the most popular tellings of the Montauk experiments is with the Netflix series Stranger Things, of which the original title was actually going to be Montauk. Now, if time or dimensional travel is involved, then it may be possible that humanity has existed in multiple realities or timelines, and that even one instance of time travel may result in millions of people shifting into another time stream in the multiverse, where things are ever so slightly different than they were before. The Mandela effect is a widespread phenomenon where people in mass remember certain things differently than they are today. Officially, the phenomenon is categorized as a case of false memory in mainstream circles, but the name was coined after Nelson Mandela, the former president of South Africa, who was reported to have died in 2013. The problem is, countless people all over the world, including Fiona Broome, who came up with the term, distinctly remember him dying in prison in the 1980s. Another weird example is Neil Armstrong. Strangely, despite his importance, people had no recollection of his death. Many fans apparently forgot or didn't notice the news of his passing in August of 2012. One of the more studied prominent examples, though, comes from a 2010 study that examined people familiar with the clock at Bologna Centrale railway station, which was damaged in the bombing in August 1980. In the study, 92% of respondents falsely remembered the clock had remained stopped since the bombing, when, in fact, the clock was repaired shortly after the attack. Other very well-known Mandela effects include the title of the cartoon Looney Tunes actually being spelled Tunes rather than Toons. Curious George actually never having a tail. Febreze only being spelled with one E. Forrest Gump saying his famous phrase in the past tense, stating that life was like a box of chocolates. Pikachu having a black mark on his tail, but today he doesn't. Berenstain Bears actually spelt Berenstain Bears. And even some cases of people thinking there were 51 or 52 states in the US rather than 50. Although that last one might be just an indictment of the American education system. Some New Age proponents of this do argue that such large-scale false memories is evidence of dimension hopping or shifting to an alternative or parallel reality where things are similar but ever so slightly different. The question is, if this is true, who is causing us to switch realities? Is it simply accidental, or is someone deliberately manifesting a collective reality that we're all complicit in? If the secret government did indeed perform time travel experiments and shifted our realities even just a bit, what else might have been changed in our past, present, or future? You see, if the powers that be actually have control of this reality, then nothing is off limits. Time and space could be bent to the will of anyone who had the power or technology to do so. In that case, the question is, who is ultimately driving the ship of the paradigms in which we exist? Do we have any say at all in our future? Who has the keys to ultimate power? The mysteries are about to be revealed.